Norman Finkelstein. I like to call him Normal Finkelfuck. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? I'm Tal, the Traveling Clat, your favorite Zionist prince, coming to you live from Israel. Let's take a look at this clip from the biggest self-hating Jew out there, Norman Finkelfuck.
This is a difficult question to ask, but I feel that it needs to be said. Mm-hmm. The events of October the 7th were vile, awful, and you cannot justify that in any shape or form. Not to say that you are, I'm just saying that we both agree on that. What should Israel have done afterwards? Because we look at what's happened at Gaza, but what Hamas did was an act of war, and it was barbaric. And Israel had to retaliate in some shape or form. Mm-hmm. So I guess my question to you is, if you were Benjamin Netanyahu, what would you have done?
I am not going to evade questions.
Yeah.
So do not take what I'm about to say as a diversion. And you're absolutely free to press me and press me and press me. But I do have to convey how I see the question.
Of course.
Your question to me has to be preceded by what I would call an antecedent question, which is, what did you expect the people of Gaza to do? What do I mean by that? So,
well, look, let's not get into that for this reason.
He's insufferable, and I'm sorry to have to pause. He is insufferable. This is an insufferable human being.
Because in terms of having this discussion, let's accept when we had Bassem on, for example, this was the nature of the debate we had, right? He was saying, well, what do you expect the Palestinians to do? And I said, let's accept that while they're uprising, as Francis said, you called it, I think, a prison outbreak. Let's accept concentration camp outbreak. Let's say that that's what it is. Nonetheless, the fact is that Israel exists. Israel was attacked in this barbaric way. Let's say that the Palestinians have every cause to try and free themselves in this way. I don't know how killing and raping civilians does that, but let's set that aside. That still leaves the question of, what should Israel do in this situation? It still leaves that question on the table. So let's say, without going into the detail, just for time reasons, that we accept everything you say about the suffering of the Palestinian people. Nonetheless, on top of that, what should Israel do in this situation?
I have pondered that question.
Okay.
And I recognize that to say they should have done nothing except to end the illegal and inhuman blockade of Gaza, which Richard Goldstone described as elements of a crime against humanity, to immure 2 million people, half of whom are children.
I'm sorry I'm pausing again. He's evading the question, and he's purposely slowing down his tone of speech. This is a corrupt, disgusting individual who is taking money from Qatar. Answer the damn question, Norman Finkelstein. Answer it.
Israel's head of the National Security Council, Giora Eiland, described as, quote, a huge concentration camp. What your British economist, before October 7th, he described as Gaza as a human rubbish heap. The Secretary General of the UN.
Let's say we accept all of this, just for the sake of argument. Let's say we accept all of this.
I recognize that question.
Okay. So what's the answer?
My answer is, first of all, on one level, it's a little late in the day to be asking that question. But asking it, you can still make the argument that whatever whatever was done to Israel, if you, for example, look at the South Africa application, it begins by saying what happened on October 7th was horrible, awful, terrible, so on and so forth. It said, and I'm quoting it, paraphrasing, whatever was done to Israel on October 7th, nothing whatsoever could justify a genocide.
We can talk about that
So-
separately, but
No,
what
it's
should
not.
they have done?
I don't think it's so easy.
That's not
to-
answering my question. That's the only reason I'm interrupting you. As I think you've observed, we're fair interviews. We've given you lots of
Yes,
time to
no
answer
problem.
questions. So my question is, what you've described about what's happening in Gaza, what you've described about happening in Gaza prior to October 7th, let's, for the sake of argument, let's just say that that's all the
I
case.
agree with you. I think that's a fair question.
So do I. So
I've
what,
wrestled with that question.
so what should Israel have done?
I would say that I'm not trying to divert. There's two concepts in international law: jus ad bellum and jus in bello.
Oh my
Jus ad
God.
bellum basically means who's the aggressor, who's the defender.
Fuck this guy.
That's jus ad bellum. Jus in bello is
He's playing with them.
how you conduct a war. And you have to conduct the war according to what we call IHL, International Humanitarian Law, the laws of war. That's conducting it. I would say if Israel's, I'm not going to say which side is right and which side is wrong. That's jus ad bellum. I'm not going to discuss it. Jus in bello, I would say if you're going to carry out a war, even if it's a war of aggression, let's say you believe Russia is engaged in a war of aggression against Ukraine, it's still bound by the laws of war. And even if Ukraine is defending itself, it too is bound by the laws of war. So I will say I'm going to separate out the question of who's right and who's wrong.
Yes.
And I'll simply focus on then the laws of war. And I would say whatever Israel does, whether it's right or wrong, it still has to obey the laws of war. But Israel is carrying out what, in my opinion, not in my opinion, what the International Court of Justice described as a plausible genocide.
So just so I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, are you saying that what Israel should have done is retaliated and destroyed the organization that attacked Israel?
No, I'm not saying
You're
that.
not saying that.
No,
So what should they have done?
I said if they choose to engage in
Then
a
they
war,
should follow the rules of war.
then they have to follow the
But
laws
what
of war.
should they have retaliated? Should they have attempted to take out Hamas? Should they be trying to kill the people who attacked their people?
I would say I cannot accept those judgments, the ones you just rendered. I understand they're not necessarily your judgments, but you're telling me.
Yeah.
Should they have? No, I can't accept those judgments because it's like, for me, I'll just give you the closest analogy I can. When the events of October 7 happened, the first day, it was unclear exactly the magnitude of what had occurred. The numbers were being given where 50 Israelis were killed. It wasn't clear if they were combatants or civilians. And it was only about, you would say, about the third or fourth day, it was clear that a crime of significant magnitude had occurred. Atrocities of a very significant magnitude had occurred. By now, the figure is about 850 civilians were killed. That's a significant crime by any standard. There's no question in my mind about that. Even if you allow for collateral damage and this and that, no, there's something very substantial that occurred there. And then I had to ask myself exactly the question you asked. You know, what should Israel have done, and how do you allocate, so to speak, more responsibility? Let's leave the legal question aside, more responsibility. And after thinking about it very hard, the answer, what resonated for me, what seemed right for me, was to see it in the terms, for myself as an American, in terms of the slave rebellions. And if you look at, for example, the Nat Turner Rebellion in 1831 in the United States, if you look at the details, it was very ugly. You know, Nat Turner, he gave the order to his Confederates, kill all whites. That was the order, okay? And they went from house to house, and unlike in Gaza, they did behead babies. They took out an axe, chopped off the head of babies, cracked skulls, killed about 61 whites. The rebellion was repressed very quickly. And once I felt that seemed like a fairly reasonable analogy, then the question for me became, how did the abolitionists, those who oppose slavery, how did they react to Nat Turner's rebellion? And it was very striking to me when I read, for example, the editorial by William Lloyd Garrison, who was one of the famous abolitionists in our country, where he wrote an article in the periodical of the abolitionists called The Liberator. And he began by saying, and this I think is responsive to your question, he began by saying, we told you so, we the abolitionists, we told you so, we told you so. And he said, we told you, if you demean these people, degrade these people, humiliate these people, exploit these people, rape these people, if you do that, then what happened with Nat Turner was inevitable. And then
But we've already built that into the argument. No,
Right.
no, I'm sorry.
but he never said, remember.
Listen, let me explain to you where I'm coming from, okay? So that I think
allow me just to complete
we're
the
just
thought.
talking past each other.
No, we're not. Allow me to complete the thought.
No,
Okay.
shut
If
up.
you read the Liberator article, editorial, he never says the U.S. government should have retaliated to Nat Turner.
Understood. Okay. So his argument is probably you got to free the slaves, then none of this happens.
That's correct.
Fine. Let's accept that. However, do you honestly think that a leader of Israel is in a position after the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust to say, you know what we should do in reaction to this is free the Palestinians, whatever that looks like. This is never going to happen, right?
Correct.
And I'm interested in living in the real world, as I think you are. If you care about the lives of Palestinians and Israelis and everybody else, that means there has to be some kind of way of resolving this that is based in reality. And in reality, whatever way you look at it, you've got two tribes that absolutely hate each other with good reason for both sides to hate each other because there's been atrocity against both sides throughout history. You may argue about who's responsible and blah, blah, blah. Reality on the ground is this is where we are.
Yes.
So my question is, how should Israel have reacted in that situation in the real world? In the real world.
Right. And I think I have responded to you, but you can, of course, quarrel with me on that. And
I am quarreling with you.
As I said to, your name is?
Francis.
Francis. You can press me and press me and press me.
I'm trying.
Yes, and I will accept that. My answer is what I've said before. What in the real world should the Palestinians have done if they tried negotiations, they gestured to supporting either a two-state settlement, here I'm referring to Hamas, or what they called a hudna, a long-term ceasefire, when in March, beginning March 30th, 2018, they tried, not least because of my encouragement, they tried nonviolent civil resistance. And what was the Israeli response? We know exactly. There's a 250-page, single-spaced UN report describing the response.
I hate this man.
Israel took its best snipers, lined them up along the perimeter fence, and while there was this festive, to use the word of the UN report, atmosphere among the Palestinians, there was music, there was dancing, there was song. The snipers, I'm quoting the report, intentionally targeted children, intentionally targeted medics, intentionally targeted journalists, intentionally targeted disabled people. They described double amputees 300 meters from the perimeter fence that Israel shot. When they didn't kill them, they targeted them from the kneecap down to inflict, to use the technical term, life-changing injuries, which for the layperson translates as paralyzed them.
Stomkvar.
One Israeli sniper boasted to Haaretz newspaper, Israel's
Elohim.
most serious newspaper, he shot 42 kneecaps in one day.
God, shut the fuck up, man.
42 children and adults paralyzed for life. And so when all the options of diplomacy, nonviolent civil resistance, when they've been exhausted, what were they supposed to do?
We've already accepted that. For the sake of this argument, I've said repeatedly, let's accept everything you're saying about the plight of the Palestinian people. None of what you're saying, though, is going to solve what's going on.
Yeah, well, to solve it, I would say you have to use the convention. I'm not, by the way, just to clarify, even though in our our conversation before the program began, I said I belong to the Marxist tradition. I see myself there. I'm not a radical on these subjects. If you can hear me through this whole conversation, I was just quoting international law.
I'm not suggesting you're radical.
So I have
what
a very,
I'm asking is,
We spent 15 minutes watching a man answering a question with a question. He's incapable of answering the question because Norman Finkelfuck is a bigoted piece of shit. That's the reality. He's a piece of garbage. He is a piece of garbage. That is a bad human being right there. And he can't answer the question because he's probably being funded by Qatar, or he's probably being funded by the Islamic regime of Iran or Al Jazeera. And he gets paid to go on these stupid programs to pretend like he's an intellectual when in reality he's a dumbass. He can't answer a simple question because the side will eat him up if he were to say Israel has every right to defend itself after a terrorist attack. But he can't say that. He cannot say that because he's a piece of garbage. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have to add. Frustrating as fuck. Norman Finkelstein fucking sucks. God damn, man. I'll see you guys in the next one. I love you a long time. Goodbye, Klats. If you believe in my content and want to support me, just know your help is needed. There's a bunch of great ways to support me, being PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, or joining my Patreon community down below. Patreon is the best way to support my channel, and you'll get a bunch of cool perks depending on what tier you join. Another great way to support me is by buying my merchandise on thetravelingclat.com. I regularly drop new merch designs like this beautiful hat, or this amazing shirt, where you can support the channel and get something cool for yourself. I also have an amazing Discord community with people from all over the world. Thank you so much for your support.